He will be presenting on test-driven development in React, and he will be covering test-driven development. I believe he's going to try and do a demo for us as well. Yeah, I'll let him talk about it as soon as he starts off. And the second presenter is Johan Karenis. Yeah, he's going to be presenting on ethical programming and the programmer's oath. And he'll be using big words like the programmer's oath in Aristotle's virtue theory, and he'll be explaining all of that to us as well. Yeah, so before we start off, I need to do what's required and just thank our sponsors, firstly the developer user group, for giving all our presenters motivation to come through and organizing all sorts of things in the background. Intellect, this time Intellect is not providing food, but they were kind enough to allow us to use the Zoom account so that we can stream to everybody. And yeah, I think just before we take it away, just a little bit about DevConf. DevConf this year will be live streamed on the 2nd of April to both Cape Town and Johannesburg, so it's DevConf Live. And there will be 6 concurrent tracks going with, I believe it's 40 speakers. Tickets are still available, so if you are interested, go ahead and book some tickets, support DevConf. Yeah, please have a look at it, see if you're interested in what the speakers might have to say. Looks pretty cool right now. And yeah, I guess over to Mish to start things off. Tell us a bit about yourself and then you can go ahead.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Joshua, you've got me on mute. I don't know if I'm being audible to everyone.
Oh, we can hear you. You're unmuted.
Oh, great. So pretty much new in the field, say 2 years. So I'm guessing a lot of you guys are my seniors, but nevertheless, I'm going to be sharing on test-driven development with React. But a bit of my background, I've been in the development environment for the past 2 years. And lastly, been working with OpenUp, a well-known organization once called Code for South Africa. That's where I've got a bit of exposure when it comes to working with React. Apart from that, I've worked with Tenacious Digital and Big Web Media. That's it in terms of my past work experience. Yeah, right now just busy trying to learn as much as I can. So in the meantime, I thought we'd get to discuss and share on test-driven development while I get to learn from the guys who will be joining this chat that we're having right now. That's it about me. But now to jump into test-driven development, just to give a bit of background on why I did choose talking on test-driven development in React. Basically, I've been doing some research and got to learn that it does have some advantages that we're going to cover. So instead, of course, maybe starting off with them, let me just give a quick overview of what we're going to cover. In the process, we'll get to see why I chose it. So I don't know if everyone can see my screen from where I am. I'm not even sure how to confirm if.
Not yet. Just try share it again.
Okay. Let me see. Having a bit of an issue here. So let's see. Yes, I think we're getting somewhere now. I'm supposing now it's been great stuff. Great. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering. And We'll start off with what test-driven development is all about and why it is important. And then quickly rush to address what we can get to test when we are developing our apps and what makes up a good test. Then the fourth points will be how we get to set up the utilities that we use to test, and then roughly how to write tests when we are developing our apps. And we'll round off with a quick recap. Hopefully all this will be covered in 20 minutes max, and leave floor for discussion, questions, and some additions. Yeah. So to jump in with what test-driven development, I did decide to take this Wikipedia definition, but I know a lot of people tend to say we cannot really rely on Wikipedia in terms of academics. In the meantime, I'll just ignore that and still use their definition. It's pretty much straightforward and does give details on what I think is worth knowing about test-driven development. So this guy is saying it's a process that relies on repeating a very short development cycle, and it requires the requirements are tended to very specific test cases. So I have to read on this one. Then as you go through each test and repeating it, you'll be actually fulfilling that process of doing test-driven developments. So the steps that you get to recycle when we are doing test-driven development, firstly, you write your test to fail. That's basically the first thing. It might sound a little bit crazy that you should write a test expecting it to fail, but then the importance of that is you get to anticipate what could go wrong when you're busy developing. Then you first cater for those things that can go wrong. And when your test gets to meet the requirements and pass, then you are avoiding, you are helping curb issues that might develop as your project grows, or that might creep up when your clients are using your app or whatever you are developing. So let me find a graph on, yes. So here's the cycle.
Sorry, Mish.
Yes, sir.
It seems like your screen might be a bit frozen. Would you mind quickly maybe
Refresh.
unsharing and resharing it?
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So good. I have no way to know if everyone can hear me because I'm just talking in the dark. I don't know, like, yeah. How is it?
There we go.
Great stuff. So I was talking of the cycle.
We're seeing your speaker notes.
My speaker notes.
Yes.
Okay. You need to hide this, let me.
Could you share your Chrome itself?
My Chrome itself. Okay. That's not okay, but then
It's frozen again. So maybe just unshare and then share only the screen, the Chrome
screen.
Yeah. Maybe just share the full screen so that everyone can see what you're going, because I think the Mac it's maybe causing things when you switch to different apps.
Okay, let's see if this will help in any way.
There we go.
Great, but then the one that I'm wanting to share, let's remove this. I want to hide this bar. Hope this. Okay, now I've lost my thing. Yeah, it's part of what I'm wanting. I think I'll rather use this screen. It will
cool.
work better, yeah. So sorry about that. Talking of the cycle that we go through when you're doing test-driven development, the first stage is to write a test, like I said, that gets to fail. But here you are checking to see if, when you write your code, it's more of a scaffold for your code. When, by the time you get to write your code, it's supposed to end up having the failed test passing. So we'll be starting off with the red circle on top. That's where you're supposed to start. You get to decide, okay, this is what I'm expecting out of this component or this part of my app. Then get to write a test to make it fail and write code that will enable the test to pass. Just enough to get the test to pass. When the code shows to be functional and working, as in giving the output that you expect, you can now refactor your code to improve the quality of your code. And back to stage one, where you have to write failing tests for the next component or whatever you have to write on, or whatever you're developing. But that's pretty much the cycle that you go through when you are doing test-driven development. You start by writing a test, make it run, change the code to make it right, then refactor and repeat the process. Now, looking at why it's worth going through this whole process. When you're doing your tests, the way you do write your test is more of self-documenting how your components are going to work. The big plus on this is it can help other fellow developers when they come to look at your code, they can better understand what you're intending to do or what your code is doing. So it's more of documenting your code. Then it forces you to write clear codes. Because in the process of writing these tests, you're thinking before you get to write the code, is it going to be able to get the work that I need done? And in that process, when you are deciding, you're modularizing your code into blocks that you're going to test. So in a way, either way, you're writing clear code through this process. And once your code passes, you have the confidence that it's going to be able to stand whatever issues might come when users are using it. Then the next good reason for practicing TDD is that it saves time in the long run. Because if you get to try and manually update or make changes to your app in the process, you might temper around or mess other stuff that were working quite well. But then if you do tests before you develop your code, you are saving time of getting to mess up things in the long run. Then the last reason that's, okay, the last one, a lot more. When you look at acceptance test and, when you get to look at acceptance test and developer tests, these inputs for test-driven development that helps ensure that your code is bulletproof, yeah. Because then in terms of what makes up a good test, when you're writing your test, it should be targeting at functionality, not how things should be done. Because if you get to focus on the methods, you're actually limiting other people who can possibly come up with better ways of getting done whatever you are working on your projects. And you also should focus on the input and outputs. But both of these, the functionality, input, and output, are all based on what you consider to be important in whatever you are developing. So you know what is important for, what is the ultimate goal in whatever you're developing. That should be the guideline, what you should test and what you shouldn't worry about testing. Then the criteria for assessing if your test is a good test, each test should be independent of the other tests. That's one thing. So if whatever you're testing is affecting the other part of your code, code base, then your test cannot really be, your test in a way is failing in terms of what makes up good tests. Then the second thing you should check when you're doing your test is any behavior should be specific in only one test. So you shouldn't try and test a lot of things in one piece of code, but rather separate or isolate your tests. And thirdly, you are not to waste your time on unnecessary assertions where we don't need to test what you don't need to test. So it's more of repetition, but yeah, it's worth repeating. Then there's that issue of having unnecessary preconditions. It also makes your test not the best if you do that in the process. I'll share a link on this stuff on what makes up a good test. This was just a brief summary of the notes that I made. Now, looking at how you get to set up the libraries and utilities that you use when you are testing. So there are a lot of them, Mocha, Chai. Now lately we're having enzyme jest. People tend to use different ones for different reasons, but we are going to be using enzyme and jests. And to save on time, it's pretty much straightforward if you go through the documentation on how you can set up these two, enzyme and jests. Jest is more of a JavaScript testing framework, which mainly works best with React, just as much as enzyme does. But there's some extra functionalities that you get to gain from using enzyme when testing in React. But these are the two main ones that you need. Okay, at least in this context, I'm addressing enzyme and jests that you need to set up before you start testing your project as you develop. Then looking at how, let's just keep to the demo in terms of how you write your tests. Guys, can I confirm if everyone can hear me, because I have no feedback from my side?
Yeah, we can all hear you. Thanks, Mish.
Great. And I hope if I'm going too fast, just feel free to jump in, stop me, or ask me to repeat whatever might be unclear. I'm not even sure if the pace that I'm going at is the best pace for everyone joining. Now, a quick overview. This is a demo app that I did in React, where you set up a counter that will increase when, of course, you click on the plus button, and decrease the counter when you click on the minus button. And I've developed it following test-driven developments. I'll just quickly open files that I have gone through and highlight some pieces of code. But to go through the whole demo, it will take long. So I'll just be browsing through the codes. So to start off, when we do our create React app, we will basically have the app.test.js being a part of our app by the time we are done. It will have a basic default test of our app being the only test within the projects. But then now when we need to add more tests to our projects, that's when we can look into the documentation. And like I said, the two stuff that we need to visit is to add to our project. It's enzyme and jests. I hope this is clear. So jest documentation, but I'm not going to go through the installation of this library, the library in the framework, because I've already gone through it, but I'll just quickly open the documentation. For us to add the jests, we can go to, the documentation is pretty much straightforward. Getting started, if you have already had your create React app stage done, then we've got setup. Where is it? Bear with me. I'm looking for the command. Yes. So we need bubble. We need. Okay, for the sake of time, I'll skip here. But then we can add using npm or yarn. Add gesture projects. Yes, here we go. So that's the command that we get to add to our projects. That is, of course, with. Where's the exact one? Anyways, it's somewhere there in the documentation, but I've lost it. But basically, it's straightforward when you go to the installation part of the documentation. After you are done, then you also need to add enzyme, which to have their documentation done by Aaron B. Enzyme docs. Documentation. So for both of them, we can use either yarn or enzyme. Yes, this is also here. Installation. So all we need to add our enzyme is this line where we have npm install save to dev enzyme adapter for React 16. That's version 16 going up. That's all we need from this. But one thing that I did realize, if you've got an older version of React or an older package of one of these two, it will ask you to have a pre-flight check added to your .env because your test might not run. So in case you face any issues, you just have to add your .env file and have a skip pre-flight check set to true. This will resolve some issues that you might have when you're setting up your enzyme ends. And just, though this must be the last resolution, that is, if deleting the node modules, reinstalling and deleting the package log.json doesn't help, this is the last option that you have. It did help resolve the whole thing. Now, after we are done setting up, for each component that you'll be developing, you can create a test file. In this case, it was just a counter. So we started off in the app.js. And then after I was done, I went to separate the code for the counter to be in the counter.js file. But you can have a test file for each component that you'll be having. Then the app.jtests will be containing the test for the app, and the setup.jtest is the one that helps us work with the testing framework. Here we are having, I'll just explain this piece of code. The import config for enzyme and import adapter, these are just to set up our enzyme so that it can keep an eye on every file that ends with the extension .test.js. It'll be helping enable enzyme run the test in those files. That's what these 3 lines of code does. The config will set up the enzyme, then the adapter will ensure that the enzyme functions quite well. And then this just ensures that you have the latest adapter running in your program. Now, back to the test file here. With test-driven development, basically you need to start off with writing your test, of course, before doing the code. A quick overview of what the key API that we use when you're doing tests. We have the describe. It'll be one of the functions that we use, or method that we use to group our tests in one block of code. It will take a string which will be describing what you're focusing on in those tests. Then inside that describe method, you can have an anonymous function that will wrap the following test that you'll be having. At the very top, this before each, it's an API from Jest that ensures that whatever is inside the before each method, it runs first before the rest of the code runs. Now, with other test utilities, they either use it or tests at this part for each specific test. In this case, using Jest and Enzyme, I did decide to use the test method, which would take two parameters. The first one will be a description of what you're specifically testing. Then in the arrow function, you have an expect being a method that will that will highlight what you're expecting within your app. And then the text will take the value, and .to contain is optional, but oftentimes it will highlight what the value is supposed to equate when you're done testing. So these are the main API methods and matches that you use, except to pave way for a matcher. There are a lot of matches in the API that you can go through when you're doing your tests. Then the matches will highlight how to fetch whatever it is that you want to test, where you can fetch, be it using a tag name, an ID, a class. It depends with what API you are using. Then, yeah, that's with the describe, test, expect. Wrapper is just conventional, but you can name whatever you equate your component to. Here, wrapper is being equated to the app, which is the parent of the whole app. But that is conventional, whether to call it wrapper or whatever. Mounts will be the one that you use when you want to go deep into an app and visit the children of the components. But if you want to stick to the just outside parent of React, you can use shallow, which doesn't dig deep to the children when you are testing. That's with the app.gesttest file. And on top, it's quite obvious when it comes to what you need to import. Whatever component you're testing, you have to import it into the project before you get to test it. Then after you're done with the tests, you can now refactor your code to ensure that the code is now clear and precise. With this counter, that's the code that will be running the counter when we, let's just quickly open. So that's the end result where we have the counter being responsible for increment. Oh, sorry, this is supposed to be decrease, but yeah, my bad. There's a mix up, sorry about that, guys. But yeah, that's with the counter where the increment, and this is the decrement. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if time would allow to fully go into the demo, but basically that's pretty much an overview of what to look into when you're doing test-driven development. Yeah, so we just covered on what it is, why it's important, what makes up a good test, how to set it up, and how to write tests. The demo would be much more clearer if we would have time to do it together. But because of time, I think we'll just keep it short and open up the platform for discussions. And yeah. Joshua?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I should end it here, then go through this code demo.
Awesome. Do you want to stop for questions? Looks like
Yep.
Gerald has a question on the chat.
I think it'll be much more effective that way, yeah.
Let me just unmute him. Ewald, you should be unmuted.
I think I am.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, Mish. That was good. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks.
You learned a few things. I have a question.
Yes.
How has using test-driven development changed how you approach problems? Or is this all fake?
I think I know who's talking from the voice. Okay. It has helped me think through the code before I even start coding. That's the first thing, because there was a time when I thought, okay, I'm really thinking through the code up until when I started doing test phase. Like the thing that I've realized along the way is that a lot can go wrong more than what goes right. So now when you're thinking of what to test, you're actually giving yourself time to attend to things that might mess up your project as it grows, or when you need to do some updates along the way. That alone has taught me to really do some deep thinking in the process of developing than just jumping to write the code. And when I spoke of that documentation, when you see that whole thing with the describe methods, it might be a petty thing that your string has to highlight what you are intending to do, but that kind of keeps your mind within frame of what you are intending to do when you're writing your code. That's where the documentation part of test-driven development aspect comes into play. So it has helped me to even write clean code as I'll be documenting in the tests. And yeah, then I've been too optimistic when I've been developing apps where I think everything will go well, up until the time that I realized when you are anticipating how things might go wrong, then you realize there's a higher probability that they will go wrong than go right. So that kind of grounds you in being practical when you are approaching your development process. Yeah, so the documenting and thinking through the code before I get to develop, and ensuring that I cover things that most probably goes wrong compared to going right if I don't address them in the process. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. That's good to know.
Oh, thanks.
Cool. There's a comment from Maiku who says, fail fast, fail early.
Cool. That's nice. Straight to the point. Yeah. Fail fast, fail early.
If there's any other questions, guys feel free to post on the chat or raise your hand if you want to speak. Teboho needs a question. Give me a second. Cool, you should be unmuted.
Hi, Mish. Nice presentation.
Hey, thanks. Yes.
I just wanted to find out, is there ever like an excuse for not using TDD? Is there like situations where you wouldn't find it most optimal?
I think when the project is way too small, like I don't really see the need. Like if you don't see the project growing out of proportion, because oftentimes you talk of a project having to scale up in size when it's catering to a lot of people. If you don't see your project going in that direction, there won't be need for you to really worry about test-driven development, because you do know there isn't much changes that are going to happen. That's the first thing. Then there's that thing to do with budgets. It does really comes into play, because what I've realized, it takes quite some time to do thorough, proper test-driven development. So if time is not on your side, it might not be the best thing to do, because it will take a lot of your time. And yeah, then mainly those two things. From my experience, because it's quite limited, if I foresee the project not really growing, and if I'm pressed of time, then it might be best to skip doing the testing, because it will get in the way. I don't know if there is anyone who has other reasons why it might, yeah. And
So Andre says specifically that's when you need tests, is when everything is rushed. Andre, I'm going to unmute you so that you can explain your comment.
Yeah, so, the time when I've written less optimal code is when I'm rushed, right? We're in a hurry, we need to get something done. I might do it the other way around. I might not do TDD. I might write some code and then write a test afterwards just to say, like, this is what it's supposed to do.
yes.
But, crunch code that's written in a hurry is very susceptible to massive assumptions you've made at the time. And that's where I've been burnt the most, is like, and the problem is you also forget because you're in a rush, you forget why you're writing the code. And so when things are calmer, you're like, why is this broken? And you realize, and then you don't remember, like, oh, we wrote this during the crunch period. I'm going through a period now where we're retrospectively going through a project and writing tests and just looking at our code and going, why did we write this? What was going on here? And we have no way of knowing what the reasoning for it was. And so I would just argue that, like, once you get into the stride of testing, it gets easier. It does take practice. It took us,
Yes.
I think, a week to write like 2 tests. And now, and that was kind of, it's now March. So that was like 5 months ago. Now we can kind of write multiple tests in a day to minutely, manage the edge cases and stuff or functions. But yeah, I wouldn't want to write any code in a crunch period without some kind of test that at least confirms what we're trying to do with this. So it's not maybe a good test, but at least it's code that tests your code.
Oh.
I have a question as well, if I can just ask. What happens when you get a requirement from, so a client requirement to change? So you've written tests, you've got stuff that, makes an assumption that, well, not makes an assumption, you've been told that whatever input can only ever be positive, as an example. Now the customer's like, no, we need to have negative numbers as well. What happens to the tests that you've already created that confirm that no negative numbers can be handled?
So I think that's when it comes to changing, having done proper test. So when it comes to changing, when you have done a proper job in writing your tests, we did say what makes up some of the things that makes up a good test is that it has to focus on one thing when you're writing your codes. It mustn't be trying to assert a lot of things in one test. So if you've done proper test coding, then you're just addressing a specific thing that needs to be changed. And the other thing that we did highlight is that a good test should be independent of other tests. So if it's so much intertwined with other tests, then it's not that much a good test. Meaning you have a tough time now when you need to make those changes, where now possibly it was a positive, now you need to be a negative. But if you've done a proper job, it'll be much easier because you're just targeting a specific piece of code that was focusing on one thing, and that's what you're changing because it's independent. So I think it would take having done a good job in the process for you to not have issues when you need to make changes or updates. I'm not sure if I'm being clear.
I mean, do you delete then the old test, or do you keep it in there so that and know that it fails, or because the requirements have changed?
Now, this is off the top of my head because I haven't had such an experience. So I'm not to be caught on this, but it makes sense to me if possibly, oftentimes we talk of commenting out code being a bad thing, but maybe for the sake of the next developer or someone to follow through your code, it might be best to comment it out. Though some might say it reduces optimization and all that stuff. When you leave commented out code, that doesn't really do anything. But I'm not sure. I don't know if anyone can.
So if I can offer an insight, when the requirements change, if you've got a test that states otherwise, that test is no longer true. So it should be deleted because it's no longer representing the truth, and there's no reason to keep it then. So you delete the test, write the new test, and you can delete the old test because it's no longer correct.
Oh, great. So there will be no need for it to be kept in the code base.
Correct.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks. So yeah, if anyone feels like jumping in when I'm stuck, your help will be greatly appreciated.
There's another question on the chat from Robert,
Yes.
which is, if you're trading off tests because you don't have time, what do you replace them with? So I feel like that was kind of addressed by you, but do you have anything further to say on that?
I think quality and stability of your code in the long run. That's what you're sacrificing. Yeah.
Cool. There's a question here from Nicholas, which was, how much risk is there changing code to be testable when getting onto a project with existing code to introduce unit tests? It looks like Evolt responded by saying it really depends on the complexity of the code base. You can add integration tests, for example, as some kind of smoke detector before refactoring.
Yes.
And some kind of smoke detector before refactoring. That's kind of context sensitive though, but a safety net of tests should be possible. Do you have anything further to say to that?
I didn't really get the question. Do you mind repeating it? Because
so the question was, how much risk is there changing code to be testable when getting onto a project with existing code when you want to introduce unit tests?
I'll throw this to Joshua. Was it Joshua talking or Andre?
No, so Andre was talking just now. Do you want
to... Andre, do you want to jump in on this one, man?
Yeah, I can. So our project was actually running for a year, and then we decided to start doing unit testing because we were just getting burnt. We had reasons for not doing testing because we felt we didn't have time.
Yes.
Yeah, we basically just went. I want to say we went slowly, but we kind of went with stuff that we knew had to work. I started unit testing, and as we got bolder, refactoring. Well, actually, we didn't do a lot of refactoring. We just really kind of put unit tests in to confirm our assumptions. And then when our assumptions were wrong, we then kind of said, okay, well, now we need to refactor because clearly our code is wrong. I would argue that any test is a good test of code because you're testing assumptions. And it's not integrated into your code, right? You're testing against your API. I understand scenarios where you have these objects that are obfuscated or black box, and so it's difficult to test those. And in those situations, I wouldn't unit test those, or I'd leave those for last and test everything around it. So whenever I was working on a new piece of functionality, whenever we had encountered a bug, so for example, we encountered a bug, the first thing we'd do is write a test that kind of retests the bug, and then we'd go start making changes. So I suppose that answers the smoke screen thing of you know, working from the known to the unknown. But I wouldn't refactor code just for the sake of writing a test. I would say this is something I need to test, and then writing a test for that.
Oh, sweet.
Cool.
So
there was one more comment from Heather where TDD is mainly for unit tests and is useful there. It is also useful for writing new code, but when you are refactoring old code or working with legacy code, then don't use TDD. You might use test to help your refactoring, test-driven refactoring. Don't know, Heather, let me unmute you. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so a lot of my experience has been with old code and legacy code, and not so much developing new code. And so I found the methodology used by TDD isn't all that useful in those particular cases. So what has generally helped much more is to first try and put together a whole lot of tests to find out what the system is doing in the first place, because you often don't actually know. And only once you've got that safety net of tests in place can you begin refactoring, and if necessary, start adding new functionality to the code base.
awesome.
Cool.
No.
Does anyone have any further questions? Doesn't look like it. Ezra, would you like to take over? Yes, no. Yes.
Sure, I can take over. I was just finding that unmute button. All right, so we just want to find out as a show of hands, how many people have never been to a developer user group before? So if you can just maybe raise your hands. There's a little button to do that, or type it in.
There's 2 in the chat. 3. Oh, Nicholas asking to repeat. Have you ever been to a developer user group?
Or rather, have you ever not been to a developer user group before, and this is your first time?
It looks like there's 2. Cool, thank you, Mish. You can maybe stop sharing so that we can introduce the next speaker. Thanks, Mish.
Oh, pleasure, guys. Cool.
Mind unsharing so that we can.
Okay. Is that okay?
It still says you're sharing.
Okay, let me stop. There we go. Wait.
There we go. Cool.
Great.
Just give me a second. Cool. So our next speaker is Johan, and he's going to be talking to us about ethical programming and programmer's oath. Ezra, I'm not sure if there was anything else you wanted to ask before we get into it.
No, nothing else. I think Rob has already mentioned it, but the entire developer user group, the meetup for today is going to be put onto YouTube. So you'll be able to also go through there, watch it again, add comments, or you can comment in the comment section as well. Okay, cool. Over to you, Johan.
Thank you, Ezra. So just before we get started, Josh, I just quickly want to confirm that you can see my slide switching. So
there we go. Yeah.
Okay, so that's not freezing up the feed. Okay, that's good. So hello, everyone. Yeah, thanks for attending this really unique version of the developer user group. Since I've been attending, this is the first time it's happened. So it's an interesting experience to say the least. I'll be sharing a talk with you about ethical programming and the programmer's oath. It's a talk that I did for Intellect Dev Day in October last year, and something that I've been fairly passionate about. I do need to warn you a bit though, if it does feel a bit like I'm being prescribing or it feels a bit attacking, just do take into account that this is something that I'm kind of sharing from my perspective and not something that I'm trying to force down on you. So the whole purpose behind it is kind of to be more thought-provoking than to actually tell you this is what you need to do as a developer. So moving along. So who am I? My name is Johan Karenis, as you already know. I'm an intermediate software engineer at Intellect. I've been there for almost a year now, enjoying it fairly thoroughly, and definitely planning on staying on. I've studied electronic engineering at the University of Stellenbosch, and kind of segueing with that, I successfully finished my philosophy and ethics module. And then also in regards to this talk, I have a close friend who's busy finishing his doctorate in philosophy, specifically the field of meta-ethics, which kind of deals very nicely with what we're going to discuss. So yeah, as I said, welcome. The fact that I've been asked to do this talk, and the fact that you're here means that half of my work is already done. You're already willing to actually listen to a talk that's got the word ethics in it. So definitely well done for that. So what problem do we have with ethics in the field of programming? And it's fairly simple. Society depends on software systems. During the time with the whole COVID situation currently, it's actually fairly evident. We use a lot of the communication channels to spread information about how the virus is spreading. I mean, we essentially have the entire country dialed in on YouTube, listening to our president making an announcement. So that's just one simple example of how prevalent this dependence is on different software systems. The next bit of the problem is we're the only ones that understand these systems. As programmers, we're building these things, we're writing these things, and normally even the developers that work on the projects don't fully understand these systems. So we do have a bit of a responsibility there. And it's our fingers on the keyboard. There's no one standing with a gun to your head saying, okay, this needs to be some kind of switch statement, or you need to write this before Friday. It's a case of we're being paid quite lucratively to do these jobs. So we definitely have a responsibility there. So you've probably guessed it, but in my honest opinion, developers should be ethically responsible for their creations. I'm not sure if other people would disagree with me on that. So how do we solve this problem? And kind of just quickly discussing it, we need to help developers develop ethical character, because it's not something that we're generally aware of. And then how we do it is we use an ethical theory known as virtue theory. And we're not going to go into the nitty-gritty of it and start explaining concepts like eudaimonia, etc. This is a fairly understandable version of it that you and me can easily understand. So yeah, we'll discuss that later. And yeah, so do we really have a problem, or did I just make up something so that I could have a talk for our dev day and for the dev user group? And I believe it's not so. I'll use a few examples. So things have gone wrong before. If you look in the field of finance, we have the 2009 stock market meltdown. Pretty sure you'll still remember that. Then with the series last year, this has also kind of become fairly well known. We had the disaster at Chernobyl. That's where things went wrong in engineering. Kind of a bit of politics involved there, but yeah. And then also in all of politics, I mean, not going to go into detail there. Closer to home, so we aren't saints. Something that I'm fairly passionate about, I'm a passionate gamer. I've been involved in game design as well, as a hobby, not as a profession. And there's been a lot of controversy around things called loot boxes. And essentially what these things are is content that's part of the game and kind of helps the player's performance in the game is locked behind the paywall, but also behind a random chance that to get these items. So essentially what has happened now is some of the content in games are hidden behind a virtual casino. And then these virtual casinos, to put them in our way, get exposed to underage people, people with gambling addictions, or people that are addiction prone. And then these people get exploited through psychological manipulation within the games, which is fairly possible, and through other means as well. And it has a profound negative impact and has actually resulted in regulation of the video game industry by some of the Scandinavian countries, if I recall correctly. Then other things that have also gone wrong, data privacy scandals. Facebook, we're looking at you. Not much to say there. It's happened a few times. We all know of at least one data privacy scandal happening. So yeah. Then data mining. I don't know if you ever used the Face app that came out also last year, I think. And that was accused of using data mining techniques to kind of steal some of your data. Then untimely disclosure of exploits and faults. There are a ton of companies that this has happened to, some fairly highly regarded finance companies as well. More of in the state that I remember, but unfortunately, some of it is behind the NDA for me, so I can't really talk about it. And then mentioning all of these things, I'm completely ignoring malware and hacking, which is a completely different can of worms. So, societal impact of software. As I've said, software does impact society a fair bit, and society doesn't realize how much they depend on us yet. They might realize it slightly when the internet goes down or when the electricity is out, but they do not fully comprehend how much they depend on us. And going forward, they will depend on us more. Technology is enabling humanity to move forward, and software is kind of the random, sorry, not the random, the rapid iteration of technology, because you can change it very quickly. So as developers, we really do need to keep that in mind. And we have a special kind of literacy that no one else has. All of the software that everyone depends on is basically under our control. So how do we solve the problem of programmers being responsible for such a big part of society, but maybe not trained in the field of ethics or knowing what ethical behavior should be? Well, firstly, I can tell you what doesn't work well. Governing bodies. So while they are definitely necessary in some instances, they aren't the be-all and end-all of getting programmers to act correctly. We've seen these in some of the largest professional fields, thinking of medicine, so doctors, CAs, and yeah, but you still see unacceptable amounts of unethical behavior in these industries. So, for example, CAs, I don't have concrete examples with me, but we all know of a piece of news where this auditing company has kind of been accused of cooking the books, etc. So there is still a bit of a prevalence of unethical behavior. And the reason of this is it's extrinsic. It's a set of rules forced by a governing body that then apply to you. And you as an individual might not have bought into those rules. So you can kind of bend them a little bit, maybe get away with some of it, and then it only comes to light when things go really, really wrong. Then also we could have ethical classes at university, and they do help a little bit. I mean, otherwise I would not have discovered this topic. But not all universities teach ethics. And while this is already a bit of a problem, we also have the problem that as an industry, and this stat is from 2014, so it might have changed a bit. But as an industry, we kind of have a doubling rate of 5 years. So every 5 years, 2 times the developers 5 years back. which means a lot of younger, inexperienced developers are going to be entering the field, and also a lot of self-taught programmers that haven't really had the formal avenue of training, which would include things like ethics classes, etc. So we can't really depend on this. Just to kind of showcase that the last slide a bit, I took this from Stack Overflow's developer survey results from 2019. And you can see that over 40% of respondents have less than 5 years of professional coding experience. You could argue that this is slightly due to the type of developer that would use Stack Overflow. But I do feel that it's still a fairly accurate representation. So there's a lot of developers that are in need of mentoring and training, and not a lot of developers to offer that. Me personally, I've been working in programming for only 3 years, so I actually still fall inside the first category, just to showcase that a bit. So how can we get the word of ethics out to software developers? And one of those solutions is virtue theory. And it's a very simplistic theory to grasp. And it's kind of summarized as, if we can just focus on being good people or good developers, the right actions will follow effortlessly. So through virtue theory states that ethical behavior is a habit that we need to learn. Once this habit is learned, we can actually we can then expect a person to act in a certain way fairly regularly. So to learn these habits, we take ethical exemplars as a guidance. So if you had a software developer mentoring you when you were starting out, or you have someone that you look up towards, that person is your ethical exemplar, because normally you would see things that this person does and kind of grasp or latch onto some of this person's opinions and use that as some guidance. You can also use a set of rules for that. So I personally use the programmer's oath as my ethical exemplar, and I'll also be presenting that a bit later. So by developing these ethical habits, or this ethical behavior that's a habit, it becomes intrinsic, not extrinsic. So no longer you have the case where someone's bending the rules and then it only comes out later. You're actually bending rules that you've set for yourself if you do something wrong. So normally we kind of strive to stay true to our habits and to our character. And if you've set that up to be ethically good, you're in the green. Your actions will kind of by nature be ethical. So yeah, as more experienced developers, and especially the more senior ones, we need to set positive examples for younger developers. We need to be the ethical exemplar, or introduce ethical exemplars to them, so that they can know how do you become a responsible and an ethical programmer. So virtue theory cannot exist without virtuous principles. So I'll basically present a bit of that here. Virtue theory emphasizes individual's character rather than following a set of rules. This robust set of character traits, once developed, leads to predictably good behavior, as previously mentioned. And we should also remember that these virtuous principles are midpoints between two extremes. Let's take the virtue of courage, for example. Courage does not mean you need to be reckless. So courage kind of sits between cowardice and recklessness. There's a balance. You can't just, so if someone's being robbed, for example, and you have no way of overpowering the robber, it might not be the good thing to do to try and assist the person or get rid of the robber, because that would just be reckless of you. rather call for help, get the proper authorities involved. That's all that you have or that you can do within your power. Other side of the spectrum, you can't just walk away. That would be cowardly of you. So you kind of slide in between. And as we move into talking about the programmer's oath, you need to also consider, sometimes you need to consider the point between the two extremes. If I mention something about testing, and it's actually nice to see that a lot of you are passionate about testing, you also need to consider there is a midpoint. You can't just keep writing tests and never develop software. So the programmer's oath is something that was written by Rob Martin. I've got the date, 18th of November 2015 here. I'm not sure if that's the video that I took it from, or when no, sorry, that was when the blog article was initially written. You're welcome to go read it. Those of you who are not familiar with Rob Martin, he's also otherwise known as Uncle Bob. He presented a talk called The Scribe's Oath, where he kind of presented these principles, and it stuck with me, hence why I adapted it. He also mentioned that this oath is intended to kind of exceed the authority of your employer. Again, coming back to virtue theory, this is my moral exemplar. So this is what I apply first before I even start listening to my client. So first one, and there's 9. I will not produce harmful code. Big statement. And we've all probably written code that we think, no, I'd rather forget. The term harmful, I'll leave that open to interpretation. Some of you may have, or all of you will have different views. So some people think that coding weapon systems can be harmful code, or coding, for example, code for casinos can be harmful. That would kind of align with my personal view, but you can have your own personal view as long as you choose one. So what's a more kind of concrete definition of what harmful code is? And put simply, one example would be when you release a defect. You do harm to your user because the software doesn't work. You do harm to your company because now they have a lesser image in the view of the public or whoever is consuming your software. And also, you're harming your team because you're reducing productivity by introducing this defect. Also, what can be harmful is damaging the structure or the understandability of the code. Software is exactly what it says it should be. It should be soft. It should be malleable. And once you make the code difficult to work with by kind of ruining the architecture or just making some God class that's 2,000 lines long, whatever you do, that you should also take that into consideration because that's harmful towards productivity. Moving on to the next one. The code that I produce will always be my best work. I will not knowingly allow code that is defective either in behavior or structure to accumulate. First thing that probably comes to mind is tech debt, hence why I put a little comment in there. But simply put, at the end of the day, you shouldn't have to go home and think, yeah, no, I really want to take a shower after writing that. Just a quick mention, Charles actually posted the oath in, or the link to the oath in the chat, so peruse that at your own time. But that's exactly what I'm presenting here. So yeah, make sure that you produce your best work, and also when you're working in the code and you spot a few things, fix the small bugs that you see. If you wrote or if your team wrote a caching tool or a caching library that you're using, and you see people not using that in some repositories, then I mean, mention that to the person and change it up, because if you just leave it there, it's going to start rotting and it's just going to cause problems. Third point, and I said there was going to be something about testing. I will produce with each release a quick, sure, and repeatable proof that every element of the code works as it should. It's a big statement, and it's kind of raised a bit of a problem. Sorry, not a problem, a question. When exactly did we decide that it's okay to stop testing our code properly? We see it everywhere. I've seen it everywhere I've worked before, and I even see it in my own personal projects. We need to be a bit more on top of this. A lot of us let it slide to kind of be quicker in producing code, and there's a lot of people involved in why the sliding of standards has happened, but we need to be very aware of the impact that can have. Just going to mention again, remember this is a sliding scale. So while you shouldn't write all the tests because that's going to impede progress, at least do write some, because it's definitely an error not to try and write tests. I'm going to quote Rob Martin here, and in his talk, The Scribe's Oath, he mentioned, the idea that we simply accept a certain level of defects is inappropriate, is unethical. If you're just putting code out there, you're crossing your fingers and you're hoping for the best, that's definitely not acceptable. We're kind of used to working with systems where defects aren't really that high impact. The worst case might be you're writing a mobile app and the bug arises when a new user is installing the app and they simply uninstall right afterwards. But they can be high impacts. It is kind of, I mean, if you do let your imagination run wild a bit, it's not difficult to imagine an incorrect variable or off by one error resulting in the deaths of a few thousand people. So definitely we should test our code a bit more. Fourth point, I will make frequent, small releases so that I do not impede the progress of others. And I'm personally kind of a bit guilty of this a lot of the time because I'm a perfectionist. But you shouldn't block a module of code for weeks on end just because you're scared showing that to other people. You should allow other people to see your work and kind of release it in small bits so that if your initial approach is wrong, they can correct you, they can help you. Or if it's a complex idea that you're introducing into the code, they can get used to it right off the bat. So going off topic for a bit of a while back, I went rock climbing in Paarl and climbed something that we call a friction slab. So essentially it's a 60-degree inclined rock with no handles. So you're just using your feet and the rubber on your feet to climb up that rock. And what happens is you need to make small steps. If you make small and controlled steps, you can kind of maintain that level of friction that you need to stick to the rock. If you make big steps or big lunges, the problem is you're not putting down your feet accurately and you have a high failure rate with these kind of big moves. So what would happen is you make a big move, fall on your face and grate all of your skin down on the way down the rock. This kind of also applies to programming. If you make small, deliberate steps, you can actually progress quite quickly that way. But if you write a ton of code, hold it for yourself, and only release it after 2 weeks, and it's wrong, you've wasted 2 weeks, which is a fairly bad thing to do. Next one, number 5. I will fearlessly and relentlessly improve my creations at every opportunity. I will never degrade them. So unfortunately, I can't ask you to raise your hands, but if you were raising your hands, most of you will probably say that you've been slowed down by bad code. If you've never been slowed down by bad code, I don't know what language you're programming in, but you do need to submit a talk for DevUG. We'd love to hear about that. But if you've been slowed down by bad code, and this might sound a bit attacking, firstly, why did you write this? Secondly, why did you allow it to stay? So it's not always your fault. I have come into the situation where I've kind of thrown a bit of a tantrum about bad code, and then it turned out to be mine. So even though we're not aware of it, we might be writing bad code. But in terms of fixing these pieces of bad code, normally we don't want to touch them. And the problem is, the reason for that is, if we touch it, we'll probably break it. And if we're breaking it, it's going to become our code. You're going to become responsible for that section of code. So people are scared of fixing or improving code because they don't want to break it. And the reason for this is, normally there's a severe lack of testing, or at least in that specific section of the code. If you wanted to change something, improve something, and there are tests, you refactor it a bit, you run the test, and you see, okay, something's broken. Let me just see what I can do to fix it. You do the refactoring until the tests pass, and you're good to go. If there are no tests, you do the refactoring. A week later, a bug comes back from prod, and then you're in a fairly big mess. The problem, though, and the reason why you should kind of take on this risk to improve the code, firstly, write tests to cover the code, but also rotting code can have a very big detrimental effect on the code base, especially in terms of productivity. I'm not going to talk about clean code here, but do kind of strive to have cleaner code and do kind of improve things as you go along. You're going to learn new techniques, and you're going to learn new ways of doing things. So do apply them even to your older code. Number 6, I will do all that I can to keep the productivity of myself and others as high as possible. I will do nothing that decreases that productivity. So before we talk about the social aspect of it, firstly, don't damage code. As we said, don't damage it, don't make it worse. It's just going to become difficult to work with. Then also, don't check out modules and keep the team up by holding on to that code for weeks. And create a set of tests that can run quickly. I actually worked at a company where you would only be able to run the tests once a day, because the tests kind of took about 2 to 3 hours. So what would happen is, you would do your work for the day, you would go home, and only the next day you would know, okay, I broke everything, or okay, my code thankfully worked. So to increase productivity, make sure you have tests that you can run in segments and you can run quickly. And then also, coming back to the social aspect, respect other people's time and focus. Yes, if you do struggle, ask questions, especially for the younger developers like me. If time blocks your efforts, and if something is taking you a long time, it's the right time to ask a more senior or more experienced developer, listen, I'm having a bad time, can you please help me with this? But also, don't go to them with every single problem, or don't go to a developer just to have a chat while they're in the middle of their work, because that broken focus takes hours to regain again. Number 7, I will continuously ensure that yes, Josh?
Sorry, there's just questions in the chat. I'm not sure if you want to answer them afterwards or during.
So I do have a question slide at the end, so then we can probably go through everything at the end, if that's okay.
No problem, up to you.
Yeah, so I'll go through them at the end and kind of come back to the slides that the person has referenced. Yeah, so number 7, I will continuously ensure that others can cover for me and that I can cover for them. This basically comes down to mentoring and teaching other developers and kind of sharing your knowledge, and also making sure that you're up to date with what your team is doing. If a team member gets sick, you need someone that can cover his position. If there's someone that's basically known as the database guy, and he's sick for the week, you can't do database work and you don't really have a team. Also, it's your responsibility. The onus is on you. Firstly, to gain that knowledge about how to do that person's job, but also to share the knowledge that you have. And there are techniques for sharing this. So you can mentor other developers, you can teach them things, inform them about new techniques or different techniques that you're applying, and also through pair programming. It's a very useful tool to actually share your thought process with other people and kind of get them into your framework of thinking. Then second to last one, number 8, I will produce estimates that are honest both in magnitude and precision. I will not make promises without certainty. This is a very difficult one, and one that I struggle with a lot. It's difficult to keep your BAs in check. But how do you honestly estimate? The most honest answer that you can give is, I don't know, I have no idea. The problem is that's not really useful towards business. And what you can do to improve it a bit is you can bound that uncertainty. So you can say, if things go really good, I'm in the zone, everything's going well, there's no distractions, this is going to take me a day. If things go like they normally do, there's some distractions, maybe a few extra meetings, this will take me about 3 days. And if everything else goes badly, there's a bad outbreak of coronavirus in the country, and people now have to work from home, and everything is just up in the air, it's going to take 5 days. So you can kind of then bound it between the 1 and 5 days, and even that is a bit unreasonable, and not a lot of BAs and Scrum Masters will respect you for it, but you can kind of try and hunt for ways to narrow your uncertainty, and always then bound it within the different sizing systems that you use. So generally, that I see with teams that implement something like Scrum, they will use the Fibonacci scale, and something like a 5 would be a standard screen of work, and then a 13 would be a major piece of functionality or something that's fairly uncertain. So there you can kind of then play with wider ranges, where something like a 1 over 2 would be something that you're really certain about, that will be easy and you don't really expect surprises. But yeah, all things considered, whatever you do not make a promise that you cannot uphold. If you say the code's going to be done by Friday, it's on you to have it done by Friday. You've made that promise. You now need to uphold your promise as a developer to say, okay, this thing's going to be done by then. Of course, certain things happen, like all of the downstreams and responses that you need to consume are down for the entire week. Certain things are out of your control and you cannot really cope with that. But again, try and make promises that you can keep by. Then the last one, and probably the most controversial, I will never stop learning and improving my craft. So as programmers, our industry evolves at a very rapid pace, and we need to stay on top of things. We need to kind of keep with that to avoid becoming obsolete or falling behind. We owe it to our clients because we sell our services as professionals. So we do need to offer professional services. We need to be skilled in our technologies and in the latest tools, techniques, and methodologies. And when do we learn these things? And this is the really controversial bit, is you need to do it on your own time. It's not your employer's responsibility to groom your career. You need to learn these things yourself. If you, so my wife is studying dentistry, so it's kind of the first example that comes to mind. If you go to a dentist and they need to do a root canal or they need to replace a tooth, and they now ask you, okay, I've heard of this exciting new way of creating false teeth that you can then bridge across to the different teeth, and it should turn out really well. I'd love to do it on you for the first time. I mean, as a customer to that dentist, you're going to, or a patient to that dentist, you're going to say, hell no. You do not want a person working in your mouth with techniques that they've not really properly practiced. So as the medical professionals make sure that they know these techniques before they even work on a human, we also need to practice these things in personal projects or just things that we do over weekends to then be able to apply them confidently and with certainty at an employer. So I'm a big supporter of personal projects. I do think you learn a lot from them. So definitely have personal projects to kind of practice by. And then if you don't really agree with me, I just want to kind of try and convince you quickly and say that there is a reason why we get paid so much. It's we have a lot of knowledge and a lot of specific skills, and it's that the employer is paying for. So we need to make sure that we offer what they're actually paying for. But yeah, those are the 9 bits of the programmer's oath. Just quickly wrapping up. So we've stated that developers should be ethical, responsible for their creations. We've also said that that's why we need to set ethical exemplars to develop ethical character, so that we have ethical developers developing the software with this widespread influence. And we each need to have a set of principles that we follow. It doesn't need to be the programmer's oath. This is just my personal one. You might have just worked with a guy that you really respected, and you think his way of thinking is the way to go, and you've just seen good things come from the project that this person has worked on. Then, by all means, use that person as your moral exemplar. But you do need to have a set of principles that you follow. If you have nothing as just the Wild West, you cannot guarantee that your behavior will be ethical. And then teach one another. If you have things that you feel you can share to people that you're working with, then do share. I've got the programmer's oath kind of just pasted up next to my computer, and I kind of love talking about it. So share with each other and share the knowledge that you have, and share your experiences as well. And yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for bearing with me and listening. And if you have any questions, now will definitely be the time. I'll start going through the top, kind of read them out and just see if I can answer them, and also take on new questions. And if you want to contact me, I've provided my details there. So yeah. I'm just going to quickly scroll up. So I just want to see there's a message from Nicholas Kotzer. QualityGate exit criteria tend to state that no severity block or critical issues will be open. It's the quick as the manager, and therefore pressure the tester to stop looking for those issues. Okay, and I think that might still pertain to the previous one. Okay, there we go. So from Robert McLean, we have a question. If my customer, I'm a consultant like you, says, do new features and a screw quality test or fixing tap tape. First question of the two, what do we do in these situations? If I fight back, I lose the business to someone who will work or will do the work that the client wants. So it's, as I said, it's a sliding balance. You can't always do all of the tech debt that you want to do. You can't always do all the quality tests that you want to do, but you at least need to have some. You need to safeguard yourself for the future. If we just continuously develop code at a rapid pace, at some point things are going to catch up with us and we're going to lose productivity. So you kind of owe that towards yourself to raise it with the client and do it to some degree, maybe to a lesser degree. So just take on the bare minimum of test, kind of test the core pieces of functionality, but you can't just abandon it completely. And it's a difficult thing. You need to make that call for yourself. You can also take the option of moving very rapidly, but then you need to quickly catch up with yourself. So it's still something that I'd say use your best judgment, but try and avoid situations where you're just firing on all cylinders without backing yourself up with the testing principles. Then just quickly reading through again. So something that Robert also mentioned there, Uncle Bob, whose programmer oath you stated, argued that the solution is requiring insurance for projects and the creation of professional organizations to vouch for members and thus lower insurance rates for customers. Why can't ethics and these types of organizations coexist? So yes, I do agree with you, Robert. I'm not sure why we need to butt heads that much. We can find some common ground, I believe, but it will take a lot of kind of education towards the client side to get them to understand why skipping all of your quality test and your tech debt is a bad thing. Okay. I see Nicholas answered Robert there. And then Robert's question. Okay, I see something from Ezra. Have you ever gone ahead with a project or work for a client and done something unethical yourself in fulfilling the requirements? You've got to put me on the spot, eh? No need to elaborate if it may be unethical to go into detail. In terms of making promises that you cannot keep, I've definitely done that before. Specifically when I just started out. So I was hired as a tools developer for a company, and they asked me to develop some financial tools in a language that I've never worked in, the language being PHP. So a lot of you will quickly understand the kind of challenge that we're working with here. And they asked me to develop a complete product on my own with no prior knowledge to working in the language within 3 weeks. And of course that did not happen. I actually made the promise, and I firstly ruined my reputation in the company that I'd kind of built up by being an intern for years and years and years. But also I put a lot of stress on the finance department who were kind of counting on me to deliver the software. So that was one of the probably the worst decisions that I have ever made. I should have really pushed back and not just try to be trying to impress people. But on a more day-to-day basis, I mean, the testing component of it, especially in some of the projects that I've kind of worked on in the last 2 years, haven't really been easy in terms of testing. So there I've actually slacked a bit and skipped tests. In one instance, I did have a severe impact on the team in terms of their productivity because I broke the builds for the next 2 days. That was a horrible thing to do. Not at our current, at Intellect currently. None of what I'm sharing has happened at Intellect. But yeah, that's another example of not kind of checking after yourself. And then also when I started out, I believe that was so coming straight out of university, I believe it was the workplace's responsibility to teach me. And I mean, that's also very quickly put me in a very, very bad situation. and having learned that, I've now adopted the mentality of actually teaching myself a lot of things, kind of picking up with techniques, being ahead of the game, or relatively ahead of the game within my with my team with these types of things. So that's also built me. So it's a continuous process. I'm still in the process of developing these habits. But yeah, so I mean, nobody's perfect. We've all made a lot of mistakes, but we do learn from them. And then it's the strive towards the positive, which is the good thing. Yeah, Israel. So Israel just said, I think many of us have been in all of those positions. Thanks for the great and honest answers. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I mean, we're all developers. We all know what's happening. So yeah, if anyone else has a question and would actually like it to voice it over over their mic, you're welcome to just say you've got a question in the chat, and then Josh will unmute you. Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any messages coming through. But yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity. And Josh, I will hand back to you.
Thanks, Johan. Thanks for the talk. Let me start my video. Thank you. That's very, very enlightening. There's a lot of thanks coming through on the chats as well. And thank you to Mish. I see Mish just quickly stepped away. He said he's going to be back soon. But Ezra, would you like to say anything further?
Still having trouble with some of this unmuting. I just want to say thank you to Mish and Johan for those two great talks for the first live stream of developer user group. I think they were both really interesting. I'm hoping we can have a few more of these. And yeah, everybody that's still here, invite people. The next one will likely still be streamed. People from everywhere can join now. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming. Josh, anything you understand?
Yeah, I think you said everything. Basically, just thank you all for trying this out with us. Apologize for the little technical difficulties. It is our first time streaming like this. So hopefully next week we can have all the basic issues sorted out. And then I think Robert mentioned it and Ezra mentioned it, but I'm just going to mention it again. We're going to try upload the whole live stream to YouTube, and we'll probably post that link on the meetup DevUG itself. Other than that, thanks to everyone for joining. And I guess that's it for tonight. Cheers, everyone.
I think they don't want to leave. Josh, you might have to give them another talk.
Nah, it's all good. They are slowly but surely leaving. Cool. I'm going to end the meeting. Cheers, everyone.